And it's always great to be a volunteer in some of these standards activities, and whether that's the American Society of Civil Engineers or whether it's the IEEE or CGRE or some of the others, ASME, things like that. So it's always very good for not only your knowledge, to improve your knowledge, but it's also good to be able to have a voice in that process and the decision-making process for new standard developments or manuals of practice developments. And so yes, I'm in several right now. I'm chairing the loading standard, which is a brand new standard in the U.S. here under ASCE. It's called the loading standard. It doesn't have a number yet, but it involves elevating the manual of practice 74, which is the loading standard, how we use to get loads, up to an elevated standard that can be used by states as a model code to implement. And so I'm involved with that right now. We have our first face-to-face meeting next week. With COVID, it's been a little difficult, a little difficult to get together. And then I'm also involved with ASCE 10 standard, which is the lattice design standard, which is an older standard, but it needs to be updated by definition every 5 years in order to be relevant. And then ASCE 48, which is the pole standard, same thing, poles in terms of strengths. And then I'm also on the Substation 113 Manual of Practice. Now, the difference between a manual of practice and a standard is a manual of practice is optional, recommended. It's a manual of practice that it's optional, basically. A standard is a higher elevation, but it still, unless it's a mandatory standard, and these aren't mandatory standards, but it's really could be referenced then at the state level and brought under and made minimum loads as required. So it's similar in that way to ASCE 7, which is the building minimum loads for building standard, that other standard I'm working on.